The room was too bright. That was the first thing I noticed. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooding the estate's grand hall with sunlight. Like it was trying to expose every lie before anyone even spoke. But the truth? It was already buried. And I was the one standing on top of it. "Adrian, sit down." Daniel's voice echoed across the marble like he owned the place. Maybe he thought he did. I didn't move. Instead, I looked at the long table, lawyers, auditors, even 2 representatives from the bank. All of them avoiding eye contact like they already knew how this would end. Like I was already guilty. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," my mother said, finally speaking. Not worried. Not confused. Just disappointed. That stung more than anything else. Because disappointment meant she believed it. Completely. "Then explain it to me," I said calmly. "Explain what you think I did." Daniel didn't hesitate. "You siphoned money out of the estate," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "Millions. Through shell transfers and anonymous accounts. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I already knew what was inside. Because I built it. Not the lie. The system. You were covering losses," he continued. "Bad investments. Failed deals. And when the debt started piling up, you tried to hide it." A pause. Perfectly timed. "So we investigated." "Of course you did. But not deep enough. Never deep enough." One of the auditors cleared his throat. "We traced multiple outgoing payments linked to liabilities associated with the estate, legal settlements, outstanding loans, tax discrepancies." He hesitated. "All routed through an unidentified funding source." Daniel leaned forward. "And that source leads back to you." Silence. Heavy. Deliberate. Every eye in the room locked onto me like they were waiting for the confession. The collapse. The moment I'd break under the weight of something I never did. But I didn't break. Because the truth wasn't fragile. It was just hidden. "And you're sure about that?" I asked. The auditor nodded, though not confidently enough. Daniel didn't notice. He was too busy enjoying this. "We gave you a chance to explain privately," he said. "You said nothing." I almost smiled. Of course I said nothing. Because the moment I spoke, the entire structure holding them together would crack. And they weren't ready for that. Not yet. "So this is it?" I asked. "Trial by spreadsheet?" "It's evidence," Daniel snapped. "No. It was a surface-level illusion dressed up as proof. But illusions are powerful. When people want to believe them, and they wanted to believe I was the problem. Because it was easier than asking a much more dangerous question. If I didn't bankrupt them, then who was keeping them afloat?" My sister finally spoke, her voice quieter. "We're trying to protect what's left," she said. "Before it's too late." Too late. I glanced at my watch. They had no idea what that phrase really meant. "Not yet. Adrian," my mother said, softer now. "If there's anything you want to admit. Anything we can fix." Fix. That word almost broke me. Because I had been fixing everything. Alone. Silently. For years. And now I was standing here. Being erased by the very people I protected. I took a slow breath. Then finally reached for the folder. Opened it. Flipped through pages of transactions. Timestamps. Account trails. Every single one of them real. Every single one of them incomplete. They had followed the money. But they never found the origin. Which meant they were missing the only part that mattered. I closed the folder. "All right," I said. Daniel leaned back, satisfied. He thought this was the moment. The confession. The end. But instead, I looked him dead in the eyes and said, "You're right about one thing." His smirk widened. The money was moving. A beat. Then I stood up straight, adjusting my cuff like I wasn't the one on trial anymore. "But you never asked why." The room shifted. Subtle. But I felt it. That tiny crack of doubt. Daniel frowned. "What does that even mean?" I didn't answer. Not yet. Because some truths don't land. Until everything else starts falling apart. And they were about to learn that the hard way. I stepped back from the table. And for the first time since I walked in, I stopped defending myself. Because I didn't need to. They had already made their decision. And I had just made mine. 22 hours. That's all it would take. Before the illusion they built turned into a nightmare they couldn't escape. The first time I realized the estate was dying. No one else noticed. It wasn't dramatic. No alarms. No emergency meetings. No panic. Just a single number. Blinking quietly on a private balance sheet at 2:14 a.m. Negative. I remember staring at the screen in my office, the one room in the estate no one ever walked into anymore. Dust gathering on shelves filled with financial records no one bothered to read. Except me. Always me. At first, I thought it was a timing issue. A delayed transfer. A temporary liquidity gap. But then I dug deeper. And deeper. Until the illusion shattered completely. Hidden liabilities. Compounded interest traps. Legal disputes buried under pending review. And worst of all, short-term loans taken to cover older loans. A slow, elegant collapse. The kind that doesn't explode. It suffocates. And the person suffocating it? Daniel. Not intentionally. Not maliciously, at least not in the beginning. Just careless. Overconfident. He believed growth would outpace debt. It didn't. And by the time the numbers stopped making sense, it was already too late. I didn't confront him. That's the part most people never understand. I didn't call a meeting. I didn't expose the problem. I didn't warn anyone. Because I ran the scenario. Every version of the truth ended the same way. Panic. Investigations. Frozen accounts. And eventually, prison. For all of them. My family didn't just owe money. They had crossed legal thresholds without realizing it. Regulatory violations. Tax exposure. Contract breaches tied to liquidity guarantees they couldn't fulfill. If a single creditor decided to push, everything would unravel overnight. So I made a decision. A quiet one. The kind no one thanks you for. The first payment was small. Just enough to settle a dispute that was about to escalate. I routed it through a third-party holding structure, clean, untraceable, compliant. No names. No connections. Just a label. Benefactor A. The case disappeared within 48 hours. No one asked questions. They never do. When problems vanish. Then came the second. A bank loan approaching default. 7 figures. I remember hovering over the confirmation screen, realizing what I was about to do. Not just financially, but strategically. Because the moment I sent that payment, I wasn't just helping them. I was becoming responsible for everything. Every future mistake. Every reckless decision. Every lie they didn't even know they were telling themselves. I pressed confirm anyway. Weeks passed. Then months. And something strange started happening. The estate began to recover. At least, that's what everyone believed. Daniel started walking differently. More confident. More aggressive. See? He said during one dinner, raising a glass. I told you the strategy would work. I sat there quietly, watching him celebrate a victory that didn't exist. Because behind the scenes, I was still paying. Still patching. Still holding the entire structure together with money they thought had magically appeared through smart decisions. But it wasn't just loans. It got worse. Much worse. The night I realized how deep it went was the night I almost stopped. A legal notice came through, encrypted, flagged urgent. I decrypted it manually. And felt my chest tighten as I read. A lawsuit. Not public yet. But devastating if it became one. Fraud allegations tied to a contract Daniel had signed months earlier. If it went to court, there would be audits. If there were audits, they'd find everything. Not just the debt, but the violations. The kind that don't get settled quietly. The kind that come with handcuffs. I sat there for hours. The room completely silent except for the low hum of the monitors. And for the first time, I asked myself a question I had been avoiding. Why am I the only one fixing this? Why was I the one staying awake at 3 a.m., rerouting millions through anonymous structures? Negotiating silent settlements with firms that specialized in making problems disappear? Why was I protecting people who didn't even know they were in danger? I almost walked away that night. I almost let the lawsuit hit. Let the truth surface. Let reality finally catch up with them. But then I pictured it. The headlines. The investigations. My mother sitting in a courtroom. Confused, humiliated. My sister's career destroyed overnight. And Daniel. Finally realizing what he'd done. Too late, so I didn't walk away. I escalated. I built the system. Not just payments. Control. A private financial architecture layered across jurisdictions, designed to do one thing. Absorb impact. Every liability that surfaced. Every creditor that got too close. Every legal threat that crossed a certain threshold. The system would intercept it. Pay it. Bury it. Silently. Automatically. No alerts. No approvals. Just one identifier attached to every transaction. Benefactor A. And for 3 years. It worked. Perfectly. Too perfectly. Because success created the worst possible outcome. Complacency. Daniel stopped being careful. He got bolder. Bigger deals. Riskier leverage. More exposure. Because every time something went wrong, it just disappeared. You worry too much, he told me once, smirking as he signed another contract I knew we couldn't sustain. This family is untouchable. Untouchable. I remember that word. Because it was the moment I realized something dangerous. They didn't think they were being saved. They thought they were invincible. And that's when I added the final layer. The one no one knew existed. Not even Daniel. Not even the banks. A failsafe. Hidden inside the system itself. A single point of control that could stop everything instantly. All payments. All protections. All silent interventions. Gone. With one command. I never planned to use it. It was just insurance. A contingency. For the day things went too far. I just never expected that day would come from them. Back in the present. Standing in that bright room. Being accused of destroying everything. I almost told them. I almost exposed it all. The system. The payments. The truth. But then I looked at Daniel. The confidence. The certainty. The way he didn't hesitate to erase me. To protect a lie he didn't even understand. And in that moment, I realized something cold. Something final. They didn't need saving anymore. They needed consequences. So I stayed silent. Just like I always had. Only this time. That silence wasn't protecting them. It was about to destroy them. 21 hours remaining, the first time I saw the full report. I understood exactly how they did it. Not what they accused me of, but how cleanly they built it. Because this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't sloppy accounting. This was design. It started with a timestamp. 6 months ago. A series of internal transfers flagged as irregular activity. At first glance, they looked random: midnight movements, split amounts, routed through secondary accounts tied loosely to estate operations. But when I aligned them with the system logs, I felt something cold settle in my chest. They weren't random. They mirrored my payments. Not the exact transactions, but the pattern. Daniel didn't find my system. He couldn't. It was buried too deep, segmented beyond anything the estate's internal audits could access. But he didn't need to find it. He just needed to replicate its shadow. I leaned back in my chair that night, after the accusation, replaying every detail in my head. Every transaction they showed. Every chart. Every graph. And then it clicked. He had been watching the effects. Not the source. Every time a debt disappeared. Every time a liability closed quietly. Every time a creditor backed off. There was a ripple. Small, but visible. Balance sheets correcting. Risk exposure dropping. Cash flow stabilizing just enough to look like strategic recovery. Daniel studied those ripples. And then he built a narrative around them. He was moving money to cover losses. That's what he told the auditors. And on the surface, it made sense. Because while I was injecting funds silently through benefactor A, Daniel was creating visible movements inside the estate. Transfers that looked like internal reallocations. Emergency liquidity adjustments. Temporary cover-ups. He created the illusion of a leak. And then pointed to me as the source. I didn't notice it at first. Because I wasn't looking for it. I was too busy holding everything together behind the curtain. Fixing problems before they surfaced. Erasing threats before they became visible. But Daniel? He was operating entirely in the visible layer. The layer everyone trusted. And that's where he won. A week before the hearing, I found the first real fracture. Not in the finances. In the access logs. Someone had been pulling restricted reports. Late at night. Not just summaries. Raw data. Transaction trails. Audit flags that weren't supposed to be reviewed without authorization. The user ID? Daniel's assistant. Emily. I almost dismissed it. Assistants pull reports all the time. That's their job. But something about the frequency bothered me. The precision. She wasn't browsing, she was targeting. So I dug deeper. Quietly. Carefully. What I found wasn't just concerning. It was surgical. Emily wasn't just extracting data. She was exporting it. Reformatting it. And sending it externally. To an independent audit firm. The same firm sitting in that room. Judging me. I remember staring at the screen. Realizing what was happening in real time. Daniel didn't just build a story. He outsourced its validation. He fed them curated data. Fragments of truth. Arranged to point in one direction. Me. And the most dangerous part? None of it was technically false. The transactions existed. The money moved. The timing aligned with financial instability. But the context? Completely inverted. They thought I was draining the estate to hide losses. When in reality, I was the only reason those losses hadn't destroyed them already. I should have stopped it right there. Confronted him. Exposed Emily. Shut the entire thing down before it reached the board. But I didn't. Because I made a mistake. A rare one. I underestimated how far he was willing to go. I thought this was defensive. Damage control. A way for Daniel to shift blame quietly. Protect his image. Maybe restructure things behind the scenes. I didn't think he'd go public. I didn't think he'd turn it into a full-scale accusation. With lawyers. Auditors. Formal expulsion. I didn't think he'd burn me to save himself. And by the time I realized that, it was already too late. The report was finalized. The narrative locked. The hearing scheduled. And the evidence? Perfect. Because it told a story people wanted to believe. The responsible son. Exposing the reckless one. The leader. Saving the family from internal betrayal. Daniel stood at the center of it all. Calm. Convincing. Untouchable. And me? I looked exactly like what he needed me to be. Guilty. Back in that room. Hours earlier. When he slid that folder across the table. I saw it clearly for the first time. Not just the accusation. But the craftsmanship behind it. You built this, I said quietly, flipping through the pages. Daniel tilted his head slightly. We uncovered it. No. You engineered it. You've been preparing this for months, I continued. A flicker. Barely visible. But it was there. Annoyance. Careful, he said. This isn't the time to deflect. Deflect. That word almost made me laugh. Because if I started telling the truth, there wouldn't be anything left to deflect. The entire structure he built would collapse in seconds. But I didn't say it. Instead, I closed the folder slowly. Placed it back on the table. And looked him dead in the eyes. You missed something. That got his attention. A pause. Small. But real. What exactly did I miss? He asked. I held his gaze for a second longer than necessary. Then said. Nothing you can fix in time. Confusion. Just a hint of it. Not enough to break his confidence. But enough to plant something dangerous. Doubt. And doubt is where everything starts to crack. I stepped back. Turned away. And walked toward the exit. Behind me, I could feel it shifting. Not falling apart. Not yet. But loosening. Because somewhere in the back of his mind, Daniel had just realized something he couldn't ignore. If the story was this perfect, why wasn't I fighting it? Why wasn't I panicking? Why was I calm? He didn't have the answer. But he was about to. 19 hours remaining. The first crack didn't sound like an explosion. It sounded like a phone vibrating against glass. 18 hours remaining. I was sitting in a quiet hotel suite across the river. Far enough from the estate to disappear. Close enough to watch it fall. The city stretched out beneath me, steel, light, movement. Everything stable. Everything predictable. Unlike what was about to happen. My laptop was open. Dashboard active. The system still running. Technically. But hollow. Like a heart still beating. With no blood left to pump. Auto coverage, disabled. I stared at that line longer than I expected. Not because I regretted it. But because I understood what it meant. For 3 years. That single line had been the difference between order and collapse. Between silence. And chaos. A soft notification blinked. Pending liability trigger detected. I didn't move. Didn't touch the keyboard. Didn't override anything. The system highlighted the case automatically. A mid-tier creditor. Nothing dramatic. Not a lawsuit. Not yet. Just a structured payment due. Amount, $2.4 million. Grace window, 2 hours. In the past, this wouldn't even register as stress. The system would route funds, settle the account, and erase the threat before anyone noticed it existed. But now? It just sat there. Waiting. I leaned back slowly, watching the countdown tick. Not on the screen. In my head. Because I knew exactly where this payment connected. A construction subsidiary Daniel had expanded aggressively 6 months ago. Over-leveraged. Underperforming. Held together entirely by quiet extensions and goodwill agreements I had negotiated behind the scenes. Goodwill. That expired the moment payment stopped. I checked the time. Still within the grace window. Still invisible. At the estate. They were probably having dinner. Drinks. Conversations. Strategy discussions about how they had contained the crisis. How they had removed the problem. Me. I almost smiled. Another notification. Creditor contact attempt initiated. There it was. Step 1. They always start politely. A call. A reminder. An assumption that this is just a delay. I opened a secondary screen. A live feed I wasn't supposed to have anymore. Internal estate call routing. And then I saw it. Incoming call, Harrington Capital. Daniel's line. Right on schedule. I muted the audio at first. Just watched. His posture. Relaxed. Confident. Leaning back like he was still in control of everything. He answered. A pause. Then a slight shift. Not panic. Not even concern. Just annoyance. Exactly where I expected him to start. I turned the audio on. Must be a mistake, Daniel was saying, his tone sharp but composed. We don't miss payments. A voice on the other end, calm, professional. Persistent. I couldn't hear every word. But I didn't need to. I knew the script. Reminder. Clarification. Soft pressure. Daniel glanced toward someone off screen, probably one of the accountants. A quick gesture. Fix it. Because in his world, problems still got fixed. Except this one? This one didn't disappear. Minutes passed. I watched the subtle changes. The small ones most people miss. His jaw tightening. His fingers tapping the table. The way he leaned forward slightly. Like proximity would somehow give him more control over the conversation. Run it again, he said to someone beside him. Check liquidity. Silence on his end. Listening. And then, for the first time, a crack. That's not possible. There it was. Confusion. Small. Fragile. But real. I glanced back at my screen. Grace window, 47 minutes remaining. Still time. Still recoverable. If I intervened. My hand moved slightly toward the keyboard. Instinct. Habit. 3 years of reflex. Fix it. But I stopped. Because this wasn't an accident. This wasn't a system error. This was reality. Finally reaching them. Back on the call. Daniel's tone shifted. Less sharp. More controlled. Negotiating now. Give us until end of day, he said. We'll resolve it. A pause. And then. His expression changed again. Not annoyance. Not confusion. Something tighter. The beginning of pressure. I leaned forward slightly. Because I knew what the creditor had just said. No extensions. Not anymore. Not without. History. History that no longer existed. Because every previous on-time payment. Every clean record. Every reason they had to trust the estate. That was me. And now? They were looking at the real version. Unprotected. Daniel ended the call abruptly. Turned immediately to the room. Move funds, he said. Now. Urgency creeping in. But still controlled. Still fixable. In his mind. Because he didn't see the pattern yet. He thought this was isolated. A glitch. A delay. Not the first domino. I sat back again. Watching the screen. Watching him. Watching the system do nothing. Grace window, 12 minutes remaining. No override. No intervention. No silent correction. Just time. And then. 0 o'clock. The notification changed. Status, default initiated. A second later. Another alert. Secondary exposure triggered. And then another. And another. Like something waking up. Because that single missed payment? It wasn't alone. It was connected. Deeply. I looked at the expanding list of alerts. Each one tied to a different part of the estate. Different liabilities. Different risks. All of them previously contained. All of them now active. Back on the live feed. Daniel's phone rang again. He stared at it for a second this time. Longer than before. Then answered. No confidence now. No control. Just a single word. Hello? I didn't need to hear the rest. Because I already knew. The first payment didn't just fail. It exposed everything. And this time. There was no one left to catch it. 16 hours remaining. The second call didn't wait. It came 12 seconds after the first one ended. 16 hours remaining. I watched Daniel stare at his phone like it had betrayed him. Same screen. Different name. Incoming call, Rothwell Banking Group. That one mattered. A lot more than Harrington. He hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. But I saw it. That tiny delay? That's where confidence starts to die. He answered anyway. He had to. Daniel Carter speaking. No warmth this time. No authority. Just control trying to hold itself together. I turned the volume up. The voice on the other end wasn't polite. Not anymore. Mr. Carter, we need immediate clarification regarding multiple exposure flags triggered within your accounts. Multiple. Not one. Not isolated. Pattern detected. Daniel stood up. That was new. Exposure flags? He repeated, forcing a dry laugh. There's been some kind of error. There is no error. Silence. I leaned forward slightly. Because that tone? That was escalation. We have 3 linked facilities now in breach, the voice continued. And we're seeing movement across your subsidiary structures that suggest liquidity failure. Liquidity failure. That phrase doesn't get used lightly. Not unless someone's already done the math. Daniel turned away from the table, pacing now. That's not possible, he said. We're fully covered. We're. I glanced at my screen. Active alerts, 7. Escalation level, rising. The system wasn't intervening. But it was still tracking. Still mapping the collapse in real time. Back in the estate. Voices started overlapping. Muted, chaotic. Someone asking for updated balances. Another demanding account access. Papers moving. Fast. Uncontrolled. Daniel pressed a hand against his forehead. Listen, he said into the phone, lowering his voice. Give us an hour. We'll stabilize everything. A pause. And then. The shift. No. Flat. Final. We are initiating protective measures. Daniel froze. What kind of measures? I already knew. But hearing it. Still felt different. Temporary restriction of outbound transfers pending full review. There it was. The first real hit. Because once a bank starts restricting movement, you're not managing a situation anymore. You're reacting to it. Daniel's voice tightened. You can't do that without notice. We just did. Click. The line went dead. And for the first time since this started, Daniel didn't move. Didn't speak. Just stood there. Staring at nothing, behind him. The room was unraveling. What's happening? My sister's voice cut through. Why are accounts locking? Try the Zurich line. It's not going through. Check the reserves. There are no accessible reserves. Each sentence louder than the last. Faster. Sharper. Panic. Starting to leak in. I sat back slowly. Watching it spread. Because panic isn't instant. It builds. From confusion. To urgency. To fear. And they were moving through it exactly on schedule. Another notification on my screen. Cross default clause activated. That one. Was dangerous. Because it meant the first failure had triggered others. Automatically. Contractually. Not because they missed those payments yet. But because the system assumed. They would. I exhaled slowly. This was the cascade. The part I always prevented. The part they never even knew existed. Back on the live feed. Another phone started ringing. Then another. Different lines. Different regions. All at once. Daniel looked around now. Not at the papers. Not at the screens. At the people. Like he was searching for control. And not finding it anywhere. Everyone calm down, he snapped. Too late. Because calm requires certainty. And certainty was gone. My mother stood up slowly. Daniel, she said, her voice quieter now. What's happening? That question. Hung in the air. Because for the first time. He didn't have an answer. Not a confident one. Not a rehearsed one. Nothing. I'm handling it, he said finally. But even he didn't believe that anymore. I checked the time. 15 hours remaining. Faster than I expected. The cascade was accelerating. And they still didn't see the real problem. They were looking at the symptoms. The locked accounts. The failed transfers. The aggressive calls. But not the cause. Not the missing piece that had been holding everything together, me. Another alert flashed. Legal inquiry initiated, pending. I paused. That was new. Earlier than expected. Which meant one thing. Someone. Somewhere. Was already asking deeper questions. Not about missed payments. About patterns. About inconsistencies. About how a structure that looked stable yesterday was suddenly collapsing today. And when people start asking those questions, they don't stop at the surface. They dig. I leaned forward. Eyes narrowing slightly. Because if they dug far enough, they wouldn't just find the debt. They'd find the silence that had been covering it. And the moment they realized that silence was gone, everything would change. Back at the estate, Daniel's phone rang again. He didn't answer it this time. He just stared at it. Let it ring. Because something inside him finally understood. This wasn't one problem. It wasn't even 10. It was everything. All at once. And for the first time, I saw it. Clear as day. The shift. From confidence to something else. Something heavier. Something colder. Fear. 14 hours remaining. The moment fear turns into panic is the moment people stop thinking clearly. And Daniel? He was seconds away from crossing that line. 14 hours remaining. I could see it in the way he moved. Faster now. Sharper. But not more effective. That's the illusion. People think speed means control. It doesn't. It means they're losing it. Get me liquidity projections, now. His voice cut through the room like a blade. Too loud. Too urgent. One of the analysts fumbled with a tablet. I'm trying, the system isn't updating. Then override it. I can't. Access is restricted. Daniel slammed his hand against the table. Nothing should be restricted. But everything was. Because the moment the banks flagged them, control shifted. Quietly. Irreversibly. I watched the internal dashboard split into multiple feeds. Different departments. Different offices. Same pattern. Confusion. Rising. A finance manager in Zurich arguing on speakerphone. We've never missed a payment, this has to be an internal. Click. Call dropped. Another screen. Legal team. We're getting inquiries from 2 firms already, how is that even possible? Because word spreads faster than money. Especially when money stops moving. Back in the main hall. My sister stepped closer to Daniel. This isn't normal, she said, her voice tight. You said everything was covered. He turned to her. Too quickly. It is covered. But the conviction? Gone. Because now he was trying to convince himself. I leaned forward slightly. Watching something subtle unfold. He wasn't checking strategy anymore. He wasn't reviewing numbers. He was reacting. And reaction is where mistakes multiply. Another alert flashed on my screen. Asset review triggered, external. I narrowed my eyes. That meant third-party auditors. Not the ones in the room earlier. Independent. Aggressive. Someone had escalated this beyond routine. Which meant the timeline just got shorter. Back at the estate. Daniel grabbed a phone from the table. Not his. A secure line. He dialed manually. That was new. No assistant. No delegation. This was personal. I need immediate clearance, he said the moment the line connected. Remove the restrictions. A pause. And then. His expression changed. Not anger. Not frustration. Something worse. Disbelief. You don't understand, he said, his voice lower now. This is temporary. We have incoming coverage. He stopped. Mid-sentence. Because even as he said it, he realized something. There was no incoming coverage, not anymore. Silence stretched across the line. And then. Slowly. He lowered the phone. Didn't hang up. Didn't speak. Just. Held it there. Like if he moved too fast. Everything would collapse faster. Too late. Because behind him. It already was. Daniel, my mother said again. But this time. There was something different in her voice. Not disappointment. Not confusion. Fear. The kind that spreads. Quietly. From one person to the next. What aren't you telling us? She asked. That question landed heavier than anything else so far. Because it wasn't about the situation anymore. It was about him. And whether he was still in control. Daniel turned slowly. I am telling you everything, he said. Lie. Not intentional. Not even strategic. Just. Instinct. Because admitting the truth now? Would mean admitting something far worse than failure. That he never understood what was holding everything together in the first place. I checked the system again. Active alerts, 19. Cascade depth, expanding. 19. And climbing. Each one a thread unraveling. Each one connected to something bigger. And still. They hadn't asked the right question. Not one of them. Not Daniel. Not the auditors. Not the banks. No one had said it out loud. Where was the money coming from before? Because if they had, they would have realized the truth instantly. That none of this stability was real. It was borrowed. From someone they just threw out. Another screen lit up. Live internal message. All outgoing payments halted until further notice. That was it. The line. Once that message goes out, everyone knows. This isn't a delay. It's a collapse. The room went quiet for half a second. Just enough for it to sink in. And then, everything broke. Voices overlapping. Questions firing. Phones ringing nonstop. Who authorized this? Why are we locked out of Treasury? We need to respond illegal, now. This is escalating, fast. Daniel didn't speak. Didn't move. Just stood there. In the center of it all, and for the first time since this began. He looked small. Not physically. But structurally. Like the role he was playing. No longer fit. I watched him carefully. Because this was the transition. From control. To collapse. And right on cue. He whispered it. Almost to himself. This doesn't make sense. I nodded slightly. Of course it doesn't. Because the one thing that made it make sense was gone. And you never even knew it existed. 13 hours remaining. The first person to notice wasn't Daniel. It wasn't my mother. It wasn't the lawyers. It wasn't even the banks. It was an analyst. 13 hours remaining. I didn't know his name at first. He was just a face on one of the side screens, junior level, probably overlooked in every meeting he'd ever attended. The kind of person no one listens to. Until it's too late. Wait. His voice barely cut through the chaos. Wait, something's wrong. No one responded. Of course they didn't. Because panic doesn't pause for quiet voices. I said wait. Louder this time. Sharper. That got Daniel's attention. What? He snapped. The analyst hesitated for half a second. Then turned his screen toward the room. These transactions, he said. The ones tied to the liabilities, look at the source. Daniel frowned. Annoyed. We've already been through that. No, the analyst interrupted. Not the internal routing. The actual origin. Silence. That word again. Origin. I leaned forward slowly. Because I knew exactly what he was about to see. Daniel walked over. Snatched the tablet. Scrolled. Fast. Impatient. And then. He stopped. Just like I did the first time. A single line. Repeated. Over and over. Across multiple years. Multiple accounts. Multiple jurisdictions. Sender, benefactor A. The room went still. Not loud still. Not dramatic. The kind of stillness. Where something clicks in everyone's mind at the same time. What is that? My sister asked. No one answered. Because no one knew. Except me. Daniel's eyes moved faster now. Connecting. Cross-referencing. These aren't internal, he said quietly. No. They're external injections, the analyst added. Consistent ones. Consistent. That word mattered. Because consistency means intent. It means design. It means someone was doing this on purpose. For how long? My mother asked. The analyst swallowed. 3 years. That landed. Hard. 3 years of invisible support. 3 years of problems disappearing. 3 years of stability. That no one could explain. And suddenly, they had an answer. Just not the full one. Daniel turned back to the screen. Why wasn't this flagged? He demanded. It was masked, the analyst said. Structured to look like third-party settlements. No ownership trail. No identifiers beyond the label. Benefactor A. A ghost. A solution. A lie. That kept them alive. Daniel's jaw tightened. Find out who it is. The analyst hesitated. We've tried, there's no direct link. Of course there isn't. Because I made sure of that. Every layer separated. Every path fragmented. Every trace. Leading nowhere. Then dig deeper. Daniel snapped. Someone doesn't just inject millions into our estate for 3 years without a reason. There it was. The question. Not who took the money. But who gave it. I leaned back slowly. Because now. They were finally looking in the right direction. Too late. Another analyst spoke up from the side. If these payments stopped. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone in the room already felt it. Because they were living the answer. Right now. My sister's voice dropped to a whisper. They did stop. Silence again. Heavier this time. More focused. Because now. This wasn't random. It wasn't chaos. It was cause and effect. Daniel looked back at the transaction logs. Then at the timing of the failures. Then back again. And I saw it. The moment the pieces started aligning. Not fully. Not clearly. But enough. These payments, he said slowly. They covered the exact liabilities we're now exposed to. Yes. Every time something went wrong. Yes. They stepped in. Yes. And now they're gone. Finally. Understanding. Partial. Fragile. But real. My mother took a step back. So we weren't stable, she said. We were being supported. The word felt foreign in her mouth. Because it rewrote everything. Every success. Every recovery. Every moment they thought they were winning. All of it. Borrowed. Daniel's breathing slowed. Not calmer. Controlled. Like he was forcing himself not to panic. Why? He asked. Not to anyone specific. Just. Out loud. Why would someone do that? That question echoed. Because it had only two possible answers. Control. Or loyalty. And both were dangerous. I watched him closely. Because now came the part I had been waiting for. The shift from confusion to realization. Not about the system. Not about the money, about me. His eyes moved. Across the room. Past the analysts. Past the lawyers. Toward the empty space. Where I had been standing hours earlier. And for the first time. He didn't look angry. He didn't look defensive. He looked uncertain. Because somewhere in his mind, a connection was forming. A question he didn't want to ask. But couldn't ignore. Where is Adrian? No one answered. Because no one knew. But the real question wasn't where I was. It was what I had been. I closed the live feed slowly. Because I didn't need to watch the rest of that moment. I already knew how it would play out. The doubt. The suspicion. The slow, creeping realization. That the person they destroyed might have been the only reason they survived. I glanced at the dashboard one more time. Cascade depth, critical. It was accelerating again. Faster now. Because awareness doesn't stop collapse. It just makes it hurt more. 11 hours remaining. The collapse didn't stay inside the estate. It never does. 11 hours remaining. By morning. It had a schedule. A room. A table. An audience. Emergency board session. Mandatory attendance. External auditors. Legal observers. Bank representatives dialed in across 3 time zones. And for the first time in years. The Carter estate wasn't controlling the narrative. They were responding to it. I stood across the street. Inside a glass-walled conference space I had rented under a name no one would trace. High enough to see everything. Far enough to stay invisible. Screens lit up in front of me. Live feeds. Financial dashboards. News tickers beginning to pick up unusual activity. Not headlines yet. But close. Because once something reaches this level, it doesn't stay quiet. Inside the estate's main boardroom, the energy was completely different. Gone was the confidence. Gone were the rehearsed speeches. Now? Tension. Tight. Unforgiving. Daniel sat at the head of the table. Same seat. Different man. Shoulders stiff. Jaw locked. Eyes scanning everything. And trusting nothing. Let's begin, one of the auditors said. No introductions. No pleasantries. That alone told me everything. This wasn't a discussion. It was an exposure. A large screen lit up at the front of the room. Charts. Timelines. Transaction flows. And right there. Front and center. Benefactor A. Not hidden anymore. Not buried in reports. Displayed. Question. Over the past 36 months, the auditor began, your estate has received repeated external financial interventions totaling. He paused. A significant sum. Significant. They still didn't want to say the number out loud. Because numbers like that change how people look at you. Daniel leaned forward. We're aware of the transactions, he said. We're investigating the source. The auditor nodded slowly. But that's not the immediate concern. A beat. The concern is what happens without them. The screen shifted. Real-time projections. Red. Everywhere. Liquidity collapse. Asset exposure. Cross-default triggers cascading across subsidiaries. And then. The final line. Estimated time to insolvency, less than 12 hours. The room went silent. Not confused. Not chaotic. Just. It. Because this wasn't theory anymore. This was a countdown. My mother's hand gripped the edge of the table. That's not possible, she whispered. It was. It had always been. You were never operating independently, the auditor continued. You were being sustained. Sustained, the word landed like a verdict. Daniel's voice came out lower this time. Then we find the source, he said. We re-establish the connection. Hope. Desperate. Misplaced. The auditor didn't respond immediately. Instead, he tapped the screen. And a new set of data appeared. Communication logs. Outreach attempts. Tracing efforts. All empty. No traceable identity, he said. No contractual obligation. No leverage. Translation? No control. You're saying we just lost them? My sister asked. Yes. Simple. Final. Like it had already happened hours ago. Because it had. Daniel stood up. This time not in control. In reaction. That doesn't make sense, he said. No one injects that level of capital without intent. Correct. So what's the intent? He demanded. The auditor looked at him carefully. And for the first time, there was something different in his expression. Not authority. Curiosity. Mr. Carter, he said, that's what you should be asking yourselves. Silence. Heavy. Because now, this wasn't just financial. It was personal. I watched Daniel closely. Because this was the moment. The one where everything either clicks or breaks. His eyes moved again. Across the room. Landing on the empty chair. My chair. And this time, he didn't look confused. He looked afraid. Because the pattern was too precise. The timing too exact. The disappearance too aligned. With respect, one of the legal observers said, "We need to address liability." That word shifted everything again. Liability means consequences. Real ones. Based on current exposure, the lawyer continued, there is a credible risk of regulatory investigation. There it was. The edge of something much worse. My mother closed her eyes briefly. My sister looked down. And Daniel? He didn't move. Because now, he understood. Not everything. But enough. That this wasn't just collapse. It was exposure. Public. Unstoppable. Outside. My screen flickered. A notification. Market watch alert, Carter Holdings flagged for unusual financial instability. And just like that, it started spreading. I exhaled slowly. Because this was the part they could never contain. Not with money. Not with lawyers. Not without me. Inside the room. Voices started rising again. What's our immediate action plan? We need to freeze disclosures. That's not going to hold. We're out of time. Daniel finally spoke. Quiet. But cutting through everything. Find Adrian. The room stilled. Because now, they weren't asking who saved them. They were asking where he went. Too late. I reached for my phone. Opened the system. Not to fix anything. Just to watch. Because for the first time in 3 years, everything was running exactly as it should. No interference. No protection. No silence. Just truth. Unfiltered. And devastating. 9 hours remaining. They didn't call me right away. Not at first. 9 hours remaining. Because denial is always the last shield to fall. Inside that boardroom, even after everything, there was still a part of Daniel that believed this could be contained. Managed. Negotiated. Spun. But reality doesn't negotiate. I watched it happen in stages. First, damage control. Phones lighting up across the table. PR teams pulled in. Legal drafting statements that said nothing, while trying to sound like everything was under control. We're experiencing temporary liquidity pressure. Temporary. That word almost made me laugh. Then, containment. Limit external exposure. Delay disclosures. Control the narrative. But the narrative was already out. Another alert hit my screen. Breaking, Carter Holdings faces multi-sector financial strain. There it was. Public. No going back now. And that's when denial finally cracked. I saw it in Daniel's face. Not the panic. Not yet. The realization. That this wasn't something he could fix alone. That whatever had been holding everything together was gone. And there was only one person who could even begin to understand it. Me. The first call came at 8 hours, 12 minutes remaining. I let it ring. Daniel Carter. I watched his name flash across the screen. Over and over again. Persistent. Controlled at first. Then faster. More urgent. I didn't answer. Not yet. Because timing was everything. The second call came from my sister. Then my mother. Then numbers I didn't recognize. Lawyers. Advisors. All of them reaching for the same thing. A solution they didn't deserve to have anymore. I stood by the window. Watching the city move like nothing had changed. Because out there? It hadn't. But inside their world? Everything was collapsing. And for the first time, they were on the outside of control. Another call. Daniel again. This time. I answered. Silence. Just breathing on the other end. Not composed. Not controlled. Heavy. Adrian. His voice was different. Gone was the authority. Gone was the certainty. Now? There was something else. We need to talk. I didn't respond. I let the silence stretch. Because silence was something he finally understood. Listen, he continued quickly. There's been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. That word. After everything. I almost ended the call right there. But I didn't. Because I wanted to hear it. The shift. From control. To desperation. You need to come back, he said. We can fix this. Fix. There it was again. That assumption. That I was still part of the system. Still willing. Still theirs. You already fixed it, I said quietly. He stopped. What? You fixed it, I repeated. You removed the problem. Silence. Because now. He understood what I meant. Adrian. His voice tightened. If this is about what happened. It is, I cut in. A pause. And then. For the first time. No argument. No defense. Just. Truth trying to find its way out. We didn't know, he said. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course you didn't. That was the point. You didn't ask, I replied. That one landed. Hard. Because that was the real betrayal. Not the accusation. The assumption. That I was the threat. Instead of the reason they were still standing. We're exposed, Daniel said, faster now. Everything is triggering at once, we need that system back. That system. Not me. The system. I smiled faintly. Because even now. He was thinking structurally. Not personally. Find it, I said. Another pause. You know we can't, he admitted. Finally. Honesty. Raw. Unfiltered. We don't have time, he added. If you don't step in. If I don't? I interrupted. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Then what? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Because now. He was standing at the edge of something he couldn't control. Then this all collapses, he said. There it was. The truth. Spoken out loud. Not hidden. Not avoided. Real. I looked out over the city again. Lights. Movement. Life. Unaffected. You're right, I said. Relief hit his voice instantly. Then come back. But not because of me. Silence. Cold. Final. Adrian. You made your decision, I said. Now live with it. And before he could respond, I ended the call. The phone rang again immediately. I turned it off. Because there was nothing left to say. Not now. Not ever. I walked back to the screen. The system still tracking everything. Cascade depth. Terminal. That was new. That was the end stage. Where recovery was no longer possible. Another alert followed. Regulatory inquiry, initiated. And then. Asset seizure review, pending. I exhaled slowly. Because this was it. The final phase. Not just financial collapse. Consequences. Legal. Public. Permanent. And somewhere. Inside that estate. They finally understood something too late to matter. The ghost they were chasing. Was never just a benefactor. It was the foundation. And they destroyed it themselves. 6 hours remaining. The final collapse didn't happen quietly. It happened live. 6 hours remaining. By the time the regulators arrived. The estate wasn't a home anymore. It was a scene. Black cars lined the entrance. Legal teams moving fast. Devices being carried out. Voices lowered, but urgent. No one smiled anymore. I watched it all unfold from a different screen now. Not the internal feeds. Those were gone. This one was public. A financial news live stream. Unprecedented developments surrounding Carter Holdings. The anchor's voice was controlled. But the word choice wasn't. Unprecedented. Exposure. Investigation. Words that don't fade. Inside the frame. Daniel stood at the entrance. Same suit. Same posture. But hollow. Because confidence doesn't survive reality. It fractures under it. Reporters shouted questions. Is it true your accounts have been frozen? Who is benefactor A? Are you under investigation? That one hit him. I saw it. A flicker. Because the name was no longer hidden. It was public now. A ghost turned into a headline. Behind him. My mother. Smaller than I'd ever seen her. Not physically. But in presence. Because power, when exposed, shrinks fast. My sister avoided the cameras entirely. Already retreating. Already understanding what this meant for her. Careers don't survive this kind of visibility. Not cleanly. Not ever. The live stream cut to documents. Leaked. Transaction summaries. Timeline breakdowns. And right there. Clear as day. 36 months of external financial intervention. No source. No identity. Just a pattern. And then. The line that changed everything. Support withdrawn, systemic failure initiated immediately after. Cause and effect. Public. Undeniable. I leaned back slowly. Because this was the moment. Not the collapse. The understanding. Daniel saw it too. His eyes scanning the screen. The documents. The timeline. And then. Finally. Acceptance. Not spoken. But visible. Because now. He wasn't looking for solutions. He was looking for answers he already knew. And there was only one left. Me. But this time. He didn't call. Because he understood something now. He hadn't before. This wasn't a system he could turn back on. It was a person. He had already lost. The regulator stepped forward. Papers exchanged. Instructions given. And just like that. Control was gone. Not slipping. Gone. Accounts frozen. Assets flagged. Authority transferred. The estate was no longer theirs, and for the first time in 3 years. Everything was real. No protection. No silence. Just consequences. I muted the screen. Because I didn't need to hear the rest. I already knew how it ended. Charges. Settlements. Public fallout. A slow unraveling of everything they built on top of something they never understood. And me? I was already somewhere else. Different city. Different office. Different name on the glass door. Clean. Because while they were expanding recklessly, I was building quietly. Layer by layer. The same system that saved them had another side. A mirror. One they never saw. Because every time I routed money to protect the estate, I routed something else too. Ownership. Fragments. Assets tied to recovery clauses. Silent stakes in the very structures they depended on. Not theft. Design. Because I knew one day, I might have to walk away. And when I did, I wouldn't leave empty-handed. I turned to the window. The city looked different here. Sharper. Like something new was starting. Behind me, a single screen remained active. One final notification. Private holdings, stabilized. Net position, secured. No alerts. No risk. Just control. Real control. Not borrowed. Not hidden. Mine. I picked up my phone. Scrolled once. Then stopped. A message draft still sitting there. Unsent. Not to Daniel. Not to my family. To myself. 3 years ago. The night I built the system. Just one line. If they ever force you out, let it fall. I stared at it for a moment. Then finally, deleted it. Because I didn't need the reminder anymore. They made that choice for me. And now, I was done carrying them. Outside, the world kept moving. But somewhere behind me, a legacy had just ended. And in front of me, a new one was beginning. Built on truth. Not silence.